Hi everyone, welcome to the sixth chapter of this ArgoCD Bootcamp. And in this chapter, we are going to take a look at ArgoCD Hooks, ArgoCD sync waves, and how they both work together. And just to recap, in the previous sections, we have seen how to install ArgoCD, how to connect multiple clusters to ArgoCD, and then deploy from private repositories to ArgoCD. And then we also looked at what are application sets, its various generators, and how they work in the backend with the appropriate sync policies and the prune propagation policies. Before you go ahead with this section, I highly recommend that you watch the previous chapters as well, but it's not absolutely necessary because these are totally independent topics, and if you know the basics of ArgoCD, you can cover them directly. So let's first start with ArgoCD hooks. So basically, hooks and sync waves you need because you want to control certain operations in a certain way. What I mean by that is you want to control the sequencing of your deployments. So ArgoCD executes the sync operation in number of steps. So at a high level, there are these three phases: pre-sync, sync, post-sync. So as the name is suggesting, that in the pre-sync it runs before the sync phase, and then the sync phase runs, and then once everything is deployed, then the post-sync happens, right? So you get very granular control on deciding which particular objects can be deployed at which particular phase. So for example, something like a database upgrade can be done in a pre-sync phase, and then something like if you have a maintenance page and you want to put it down, then you can use it in post-sync phase. So you can use hooks by adding an annotation, which is ArgoCD argopros.io/hook, and then you can define when this particular object will be deployed, right? So in this example, I've shown pre-sync, and by default it is sent to sync, which is the default phase. So once you have hooks, right, then what you can also do is within each phase you can have one or more waves, and what that will allow you to do is to ensure certain resources are healthy before subsequent resources are synced. So again, sync waves also are for the same functionality where you want to do controlled and sequential deployments in your ArgoCD cluster, right? But with sync waves, you can go much more granular. For example, in the pre-sync phase, you might have multiple activities, and in those multiple activities, some activities need to be carried first before the other can be carried over, right? So for example, if you use a sync wave of -1, then that would be taking precedence over a sync wave of a value of, for example, 1, right? So it can be set with an annotation called argocd.argopros.io/sync-wave. So in this example, you are seeing a value of 5. So by default, the sync wave is set as 0 for all the objects if you don't define them. Now, if you want to deploy something beforehand, you can use negative values as well, right? So that's how you can get very granular with hooks and sync waves. And as I mentioned earlier as well, you can have multiple waves in each phase. Moving on, after the hooks and sync waves, we have something called hook deletion policy. So what they help you in achieving is how you want your hooks to be deleted, right? So for example, if you ran a cron job to update the database, now you don't want that job to run again and again. You need a deletion policy so that that particular hook can be deleted, right? So that's where we set something called hook deletion policy, and this is the way we set it. So for example, in this case, once the integration tests are done in the post-sync phase, we added hook deletion policy of hook succeeded, which means if the hook is succeeded, then only go ahead and then delete that resource. We have two more, which is hook failed, which means delete the hook even if the resource has failed. And then we have before hook creation, which means that before running the new hook, delete any existing hook which is present out there. So this is also very powerful, and I'll show you an example of how these all work together. Now, before I do that, I also want to cover the precedence order, because we covered a lot of things here, which is sync waves, then the hooks or various phases that we have. So how do they all fit into one picture, right? So whenever you define all these values, so the order ArgoCD starts the sync is this. So first is phase, which means first the pre-sync phase will run, then the sync phase, which is the default phase, and then the post-sync phase will run. Now in each of those phases, we have the sync waves, right? So in each phase, whichever object which will have sync wave number as the lowest will run first, and then whichever will have the highest number will run at the last. Now after that, ArgoCD will sync based on the kind. So for example, namespace would be synced first, then config maps, then service accounts, etc. And then the other resources like deployments, etc. So we have the whole list here, and I think I will show you that in a moment. And then by name, which is alphabetical order. Now it repeats this process until and unless all the phases are run and in the appropriate order in which the wave number is defined. So one thing to note here is now the reverse will happen at the time of deletion. So first the resource with the highest value of sync wave would be deleted first in the post sync, then the resources in the sync phase will be deleted, and then the resources in the pre-syncs will be deleted if there are any. So that's what happens when you do a deletion on objects which have these phases and sync waves annotations in them. Now one thing to note here is between each and every sync wave there's a delay of 2 seconds. So if one object with sync wave -1 ran, and then the next one will be picked up after 2 seconds. So this is the default behavior of Argo CD, but you can change this behavior by tweaking the Argo CD sync wave delay parameter in Argo CD config. So with that we have covered all the theory part of it. Now let's move on to the demos. But before I do that, this is the part which I mentioned, that Argo CD syncs based on the kind of the resources as well. So first namespace would be synced, then network policies, and then at the end, ingress or cron job would be synced. So, this is where the precedence order is mentioned. Now you can find all the resource material for this particular course in the 04-sync-waves directory. And if I go to this directory, I have a very simple manifest file here. And this is I have taken from the Argo CD official GitHub repository. And this just demonstrates how all these things come into picture. So in this example, what we do is we have a database and a service. So what we do is we first upgrade the database, then we add the maintenance page, and then we deploy the front-end application, and then we remove the maintenance page. And in all these steps, we use sync waves and hooks. So let's start with this particular job. What it will do is it will upgrade the SQL schema, and it will run in the pre-sync phase, which means before the sync phase, right? Because sync phase is the default phase, right? And it just does the upgrade schema. It doesn't do anything actually, but it's just for demonstration purposes that we are running a upgrade SQL schema. Then we have a replica set. Now nothing is mentioned here, which means that it will run as sync wave of 0 and the hook as sync. And then I have a backend service, and then I have a job in the sync phase, but with sync wave of 1, and I am saying that put the maintenance page up, right? And this will be the deletion policy will be before hook creation, which means run this particular job only after all the other hooks are deleted, right? Which means this is done and then deleted. So once that is done, then we deploy the front end. And as you can see is we haven't mentioned the hook in the replica set here, front end replica set here, but we have mentioned the sync wave. So which means that it will also run in the sync phase, but it will have a sync wave of 2, which means it will run after the backend is deployed, right? And then we deploy the service for that particular front end, which again has the phase of sync because it is not defined, and sync is the default phase. And we have the sync wave as 2 here, which means it will also be deployed after the backend is deployed and the maintenance job is successfully run. And then once that is done, what we do is in the sync phase we have a sync wave of 3, which means once the front end also comes up, go ahead and then put the maintenance page down, right? And then we have before hook creation as the hook deletion policy, which means delete all the hooks which are defined in this particular manifest. So this is the entire set of activities which are happening here. So let me just go ahead and then show this to you in the console. So if I click on this new application and type sync wave and hook application, I'll choose the project as default, sync policy as automatic, clone self heal, I'll set the deletion finalizer. Now if you want to look at all these options that I have here and what they do, look at the chapter 3 where I cover sync policies and prune propagation policies and all these options in detail. I'll auto create the namespace and the source will be this one. So I go here and then copy this and go to ArgoCD console, type this here, and path is 04 sync waves. Cluster URL I'll deploy in the local cluster. Namespace, let's keep it as default. I'll go ahead and hit create now, and you'll see that a new application is coming up here. Now if I go to this application, you'll see a lot of activities happening here. So if I zoom out a little bit, you'll see that first of all the maintenance page is coming up now, and the easiest way to identify whether there is any hook mentioned or not is with this anchor sign over here, right? And we can see that the maintenance page has come up, front end got deployed, back end got deployed, and then the maintenance page came down. So these are all the set of activities which happened. So if I have to show you in detail what happened in the backend, because this was too quick, so if I go to sync status here and if I start from scratch, then you can see that these are the operations that happened sequentially. So first we have this hook or a job which ran in the pre-sync phase, which updated the SQL schema. Then in the sync phase we have the backend which came up, and then we had another hook in the sync phase which brought up the maintenance page, and then we created the front end, and then we brought in the maintenance page in the sync phase but with higher sync wave number. So this is what happened in the backend here. Awesome. So this is what I just wanted to show you in this particular chapter. Now if you have any questions, feel free to drop them down in the comment section below. But I hope this section would have been useful for you and demonstrated that how powerful Argo CD can become after these hooks and sync waves functionality, and how you can control and sequentially deploy your resources. That's all from this particular chapter, and in the next chapter we are going to take a look at how to optimize performance of Argo CD. So until then, stay tuned and see you in the next chapter. Thank you so much.